Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to a new month on Patreon. I am thrilled to bring you the Claudette Skirt. This is a glamorous 1940s inspired knit skirt. It was inspired by old Hollywood and it was named for Claudette Colbert, who starred in the 1934 version of Cleopatra and wore these amazing costumes with draped fronts. So if you want to know more about that, make sure to join me on Crowdcast. Every month I do a Crowdcast where I give you some behind the scenes and also some more historical, inspirational context for our patterns. So I hope you will join me for the Crowdcast because I have a lot of fun photos to share this month. So the Claudette skirt is inspired by those 1940s designs, specifically golden age of Hollywood design. You will see so often in 40s dresses a sort of narrow skirt with a twist or a drape in the front. These drape skirts were often made in crepe or jersey to get that really luxurious flowing feel to them. And for comfort, we've done ours in a jersey knit. So we've given you two lengths to choose from. There's the full length and a knee length. And we've also done a partial elastic band. So it's a pull-on skirt and very comfortable. All right, so let's get started talking about the pattern pieces and then we will get into fabric and supplies. Okay, so as always, we are going to go through the pattern pieces for the Claudette skirt so you can get a sense of how they come together. So I've minimized these pattern pieces so you can see them all together on the screen. And the nice thing about this skirt is there's only 5 pattern pieces. You get a lot of impact for those 5 pieces. It can be a little confusing how they come together, so I'm really excited that we get this opportunity to show you how they come together. I will tell you we had a lot of healthy debate in the studio on what to call these pattern piece names so that you would really understand the construction. So I'm just going to take you through it and I think it will all make sense. Okay, so for the front of the skirt, you have 2 pieces because this is an asymmetrical design. You have your skirt front overlay / drape, and then you have your skirt front underlay. So what you need to know is that you have, this is essentially, think of it like a dart. You're gonna sew it like a dart with one side that's gathered into a non-gathered side on both of these pieces. And this is the center front of each piece. And so what's gonna happen is the overlay piece will be sewn on top of the underlay. They will both be joined at that center front dart or seam. And then this extension here gets pleated and sewn to the waistline to form that gorgeous center front drape. Okay, so you have a few markings. We've really labeled everything very well on this pattern because I know it can get confusing. So make sure to walk through all of those labels. But for now, I will just tell you, you have your center front line on both of those pieces so you know where they meet. We have also given you, rather than a grain line, which you would normally have, because this is a pattern for knits, we give you the direction of greatest stretch for the fabric. So you want the stretchiest direction of the fabric to go horizontally around the body. So that's what that line right there is. You also have cutting lines for the knee length version and then for the full length version. We've also given you a fold back line for, it's sort of like a cut on facing for the front drape. So make sure you take a look at that as well. And then of course, gathering circles. We've also marked the side seams, which they are, to help you figure out this pattern as you put it together. Okay, so those are your 2 front pieces for the skirt. And that's the most complicated part of it. The skirt back looks like a regular long skirt back, cut on the fold. Again, direction of greatest stretch and your knee length cutting line. And then we have 2 facing pieces. You have your front waist facing piece, which you are going to cut in your fabric and also in your interfacing, which for the interfacing on this project, we used power net, okay, because it's really going to stand up nicely and still stretch. So we recommend power net as a sew-in interfacing for that piece. And then you have your back waist facing also cut on the fold. You're gonna cut one of your fabric and one of that interfacing or power net. And just a note, the back waist facing is where you will kind of sandwich in that 2-inch wide elastic in the back. Okay, so those are all your pattern pieces. Next, we're going to talk about fabric and supplies. Okay, so next we're going to talk about fabric and supplies. And let's start with fabric. So this skirt was specifically designed for knits and for stretchier knits. So you're going to be looking for jersey fabrics. And the stretch percentage that we're recommending is 50 to 75%. So that means you'll be able to test it by taking 4 inches of your fabric and put down a clear gridded ruler, 4 inches, and then stretch it as far as you comfortably can and then see how far it stretches. So you want that 4 inches to stretch to between 6 and 7 inches. So that means you've got 50 to 75% stretch. Okay, so this is a higher stretch fabric. So you want to make sure that you're getting within that range so that you get the right fit, right? Last year we did a fit clinic on how stretch in fabric affects fit. And hopefully you watched it and now you know that if you go outside of those parameters, you're gonna get a different fit. So you can experiment with different amounts of stretch, but know that you're gonna have to adjust the pattern to adjust the fit, okay? So here are 3 examples of the types of jerseys that we recommend. The first one on top here, this is a rayon spandex jersey, and this is I think it's the perfect fabric for this skirt. It's lightweight, it's nice and stretchy, it has like a really beautiful drape, it feels amazing on your body, and we have a great source for these that we will link you to in the instructions. So really love this fabric for this skirt. We like to pull out the lurex whenever we can, as you guys know. So this is a lurex jersey and it also falls within that stretch percentage and would make a really fabulous glitzy Claudette skirt. We also recommend, this is a terry. This is what we used for the society dress robe hack. So something like this could make it a more casual or like a beach cover up even almost. Okay, so those are a few fabrics that we recommend, but in general, you're looking for jersey fabrics with between 50 and 75% stretch. Okay, so utility fabric wise, you are going to need an interfacing for the facing pieces. And we're recommending Power Net as a sew-in interfacing because it has a nice structure to it and it stretches enough to stand up to this fabric. So we're using a nice firm Power Net. It's the same type of Power Net that we've used in a few projects now, so maybe you already have some on hand even. And then you're also going to need some 2-inch wide elastic for the back waistband. The back of this, so this is a partial elastic waistband for comfort and pull on ease. So you're gonna just need enough for the back waistband. Now, machine-wise, you can sew this entire skirt on your sewing machine. You don't need a serger, but you are going to need specialty needles because it is spandex fabric. So you'll want a stretch or jersey needle to match the weight of your fabric. And if you like, you can use a stretch twin needle to do a twin hem, a twin stitched hem. But that is not necessary because you could also substitute that with a narrow zigzag hem, okay? But if you like a twin needle hem, you could grab one of those as well. And then finally, as always, you're gonna need some thread, and we recommend all-purpose polyester thread for this project. So that's it, your fabric and supplies. Okay, so I have my skirt front underlay here. And you can see I have marked in the stitching line here on both the right and wrong sides of this piece. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to gather this long curved section right here between the gathering circles. And one thing you need to note is that we're going to start gathering with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then it tapers to about 1/8 of an inch down here. So keep that in mind as you're gathering. I'm working from the right side here, and I'm starting my gathering stitches at the upper circle using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a long basting stitch, and just gradually tapering to a smaller seam allowance until you're about 1/8 of an inch at the lower gathering circle. And remember to leave long thread tails on both ends. And keep in mind that we're only going to be doing 1 row of gathering stitches, not 2 like we normally do. Okay, so now working from the wrong side, I'm going to pull up the bobbin thread to gather. Concentrating those gathers, and you're gathering to the length of the stitching line on the opposite side of that opening. So this is the line that you're comparing it to, and you want both of those sides to be about roughly the same length. Okay, so now we're working with the skirt front overlay, and you can see this rectangular left-hand side. That is the pleated drape, and I have made little snips at the pleat marks so that I will be able to make those pleats later. And we're doing the same thing on this right-hand side of the piece as we're looking at it now, gathering between the circles. And because we're working on the opposite side of the piece, I'm going to have to turn my piece around in the machine, and I'm going to start at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and taper out to 1/2 an inch gradually while I'm gathering. Okay, so leaving those long thread tails again and using a long gathering stitch, I'm starting at the lower gathering circle, about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I will be tapering up to that 1/2 inch seam allowance at the upper gathering circle. And by the way, you want to make sure to end exactly on your gathering circles. You don't need to go past them to the raw edge of the piece. Okay, so same thing again. I am pulling up the bobbin thread and gathering up these stitches. And once again, you want to make it the same length, just gather enough so that it's the same length as the opposite side of the piece. So concentrate those gathers and then just compare it to the side where it's going to meet. It almost looks like a little dart, right? So those two legs of the dart should be the same length. Okay, so now we're going to focus on this center front ruched seam. And we're starting with the underlay piece, which is the first piece that we gathered, with the right side up. And we're focusing on this little dart, little cutout with one side ruched and the other not. And you're going to fold it so that it is wrong sides together. Very important. Remember, that's the right side of the underlay facing up. And you want to make sure that you don't have any gathers in this upper seam allowance here. So no gathers beyond the circle. And now I'm just pinning the gathered side of this little dart to the non-gathered side and matching them up and distributing the gathers. Okay, so now I just have my underlay pinned. And the next thing we're going to do is grab our overlay piece. And you're going to take that gathered side of the overlay piece and you're going to, we have it right side up now. And now I'm going to flip it so it right side facing down on top of this little sandwich we're making here. So you have two gathered sides on top of each other and then the flat side with the marked in seam line on the bottom. Okay, so 3 layers that I'm pinning together here. Okay, so I'm just spending a little time here distributing my gathers and making sure there's no weird clumps of gathers or anything like that, because we do have 2 gathered layers on top of each other here. So just get it as flat as possible. And now we're going to work from the underside, so the flat side, and you want to make sure that the drape section is free and you're only concentrating on these 3 edges that we've put together here. And you want to make sure that all of your raw edges are exactly matching. So I'm spending a little time here just making sure that everything is exactly lining up. And this is where you would have marked in your stitching line. Mine disappeared a little, so I'm going to remark it. But you would have marked in your stitching line on the right side of the underlay, and that is what we are going to stitch along. So following that stitching line, almost like you're stitching a dart here. So I went back and just marked that stitching line in a little bit better. And what I'm going to be doing is stitching from the top here, which will be a little weird because the bulk of my work will be to the right of the needle when I go to stitch now, which would normally be the opposite. But just because we need to be stitching from this side, you're going to do it this way, and just make sure to follow your marked in stitching line. Okay, so I'm back stitching at the top and just taking out all of these pins as I go, and just making sure that all these layers stay nice and flat, and following my marked stitching line with a regular stitch length. And it's really important that you want to make sure that this drape layer stays free of your stitching. You don't want to get it caught in your stitching. And then you're going to just gradually veer off the fabric. Just like I said, imagine that you're sewing a dart here, gradually veering off to that point. And then you're going to leave yourself thread tails at the end to tie off. And now I am just tying off the ends in a double or triple knot, and then you're going to trim them close. And the next thing we're going to do is trim down these seam allowances just to get rid of some of that bulk. And then you are going to open out the skirt, and I'm looking from the wrong side here without the drape. So you'll see those seam allowances get sandwiched between the two sides of the skirt. This is the inside. We're going to press those two sides of the skirt on top of each other. And now if I turn it around so that the right side of the skirt is facing up, you will see the drape, which is going to get pleated and sewn to the waistline here. And then you just need to press everything over to the side of the skirt first so it lays flat. Okay, so I basted my left side seam layers together at 1/2 inch. And you can see here, I forgot to do the first step in the instructions, which was to hem the underlay, the lower edge. So if you, like me, forgot, you can just turn up that hem allowance 1/2 inch and just fold it up, and then you'll be able to hem the skirt all at once at a later stage. Okay, so now we're working with the drape, and you can just kind of isolate it, so get the skirt out of the way, and we're working from the right side. And you can see on the left side of the drape, I have already pressed a crease in there by folding the left side in 2 inches all the way down. And then you can open it back up after you've creased it. And what we're going to do now is form those 2 pleats. So you have 2 sets of pleat notches here, and follow the pattern arrows. So if you want to grab your pattern piece and have it handy, then you can figure out which way to fold the pleats. So here's my next set of pleat notches. So I'm forming the next pleat here and pinning it in place. And make sure that those notches or the little pleat marks are right on top of each other, and then pin in place. And now on the right hand side, you're going to have another notch here, and that is where you turn in the right hand side of the drape. And this gets turned in 1 3/8 inches on the right hand side. So I'm turning it wrong side up, and I'm going to press it just a few inches down, 1 3/8 inches to the wrong side. Okay, now back to the right side. I have turned in that right edge, and now I'm refolding the creased left-hand side to envelop the pleats inside. And now I'm pinning all the layers together. And now I'm going to pin it to the skirt. And what I need to do is find the center of this drape. So you can just kind of fold it in half, like so. Find the center, and then that center point gets matched to your ruched center front seam here. So just match it up, and then the upper raw edges should match along the waistline. And now I'm pinning the drape to the skirt. So once again, pinning all these layers together. Getting everything nice and flat, and make sure that your pleats stay where they're supposed to be. And next thing we're going to do is baste the drape to the skirt itself at the waistline edge. Okay, so when you put this in the machine, just make sure that your pleats stay where they're supposed to, especially as you start sewing and the presser foot kind of smushes them down. And I'm just basting all these layers together at 1/2 inch. I also finished basting the upper edge of these 2 layers here so that all my layers are flat. And the next thing we're going to do is grab our skirt back and put it right sides together with the skirt front. Like so. Make sure it's right sides together. And then you're going to pin your side seams. And this will take me a little while to pin because it's such a long seam, but I'm just matching the raw edges, and then we are going to stitch using a zigzag stitch at 5/8 of an inch on both the left and right side seam, and then the seam allowances get pressed towards the skirt back. Okay, so I've sewn both side seams and they are pressed towards the skirt back. And now you can put the skirt to the side, and we're going to focus on the facings. So as you can see, I have already basted my power net to the facings. And this is almost like a sew-in interfacing, but it stretches and has some firmness. And now we're going to focus on the back facing, and we're going to measure our 2-inch elastic, the length that we need. So I have marked in my seam lines on the lower edge of the facing. And now I'm going to take a length of 2-inch elastic, and I'm walking it along the bottom of the facing from seam line to seam line, not edge to edge, but from that marked seam line to marked seam line. And I am making a mark with my nail there. And now we're going to subtract 1 inch from that length because we need to stretch it to fit so that it hugs your body. So I came in 1 inch from where I marked it, and now I am cutting. And next you'll see that I'm going to double check my length of my elastic. So I'm re-walking it from marked seam line and just along the bottom edge of the piece. And see how it's coming up 1 inch short from the other marked seam line. That's what you're looking for. Okay, so I'm folding my elastic in half and placing a pin at the center. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the facing, finding the center of the facing and placing another pin there. And then you're going to match those 2 pin marks to each other and pin on top of each other so that you're matching the center of the elastic to the center of the facing at the lower edge. And then I'm going to match each end of the elastic to that marked in seam line. So now just repeating on the opposite end, taking the cut end of the elastic and matching it to the 5/8 in marked in seam line. And so now I'm going to stretch the elastic to meet the lower edge and zigzag these two layers together. Okay, so now you can see that it might look a little roughly at the bottom edge of your piece, and that's totally fine because we stretched the elastic to fit. You can give it a little steam if you want, but the next thing we're going to do is put the front facing right sides together with the back facing, and we're going to pin and stitch along the short side seams. Okay, so you can see that I've zigzagged those seams, and also my back elastic is free of the seams. That's important. And now you're going to press those seam allowances towards the front facing. And we'll come back and apply the facing to the skirt. Okay, so now we're going to take our facing unit and we're going to put it right sides together with the skirt. And make sure that the elastic is in the back of the skirt, and we're going to match our side seams. So make sure that the seam allowances for the skirt stay pressed to the back and the facing stay pressed towards the front. And that will help us avoid getting too much bulk right on top of itself. And so we're going to pin the side seams and then pin around the rest of the skirt. I'm pinning the front of the skirt here. And now I'm just making sure on the back that the elastic is staying free of my pinning, and I'm just pinning the facing itself to the skirt at the waistline. Okay, so now I am stitching at 5/8 of an inch. I'm using a zigzag stitch, and just remember to keep the elastic free of your stitching at the back of the skirt. Okay, so I'm going to start by grading my seam allowances, and the facing seam allowance will be the one that I trim shorter. So just starting at a side seam here and trimming down the seam allowance to about 1/8 of an inch, or a little bit taller is fine. But just trimming down the seam allowance of the facing and power net separately, all the way around. And next I'm going to do the skirt seam allowance, which can be just a little bit taller, so trim that down to about 1/4 inch. Again, all the way around so that we've staggered the height of the seam allowances. Okay, so now we're going to understitch. So you're going to take the facing and you're going to take the seam allowances from the waistline seam and make sure that they're oriented underneath the facing. And now we're going to understitch with a zigzag stitch right next to the seam line, making sure that you're stitching through both seam allowances underneath. Okay, so as you go to understitch, make sure that you're folding the seam allowances so that they're underneath the facing, Also, they're going to be overlapping and kind of enveloping the elastic on the inside as well. So keep that in mind. And I'm just holding all the layers here, making sure that the seam allowances stay where they need to be, and also that they're wrapping over on top of the elastic on the inside. And then just continuing to stitch all the way around using a zigzag stitch, understitching the entire facing waistline. Okay, so now I'm turning the facing to the inside of the skirt, and you can press along the upper edge. And that is it, your completed waist facing. The next thing we're going to do is lift up the drape, and we're going to stitch in the ditch to secure the facing to the front of the skirt. So you want to smooth the facing, the front facing, behind that center front gathered seam. And I'm placing a pin right through that seam line, and again, getting the drape out of the way. Now we're going to take this to the machine and just isolate that center front seam, making sure it's smooth, the facing is smooth behind it, and it's kind of bulky to get under your presser foot here. But once you do, you are going to use a straight stitch and stitch directly in the seam line, aka stitching in the ditch, to the bottom of the facing, and then back stitch. And then, okay, just clip your threads, and then you'll see that this stitch helps keep the drape folded to the inside of the skirt as you wear it. Okay, so now we're going to do our hem. You're going to turn the hem allowance to the wrong side of the skirt, a 1/4 inch all the way around the skirt. And you can see I'm starting with the overlay here because there is this 2-inch extension at the front of the skirt, and there's like a little divot in the pattern here. So you're just gonna have to work around that and just fold it in as best you can there. And when you get there, just continue pressing all the way to the front edge of the extension. And now I'm going to continue pressing all the way around the skirt. And then once you've done that, we're going to top stitch using a zigzag at a 1/4 inch. And so I'm going to zigzag the hem in place all the way around the skirt using a zigzag. And here I'm starting at the underlay. Remember where I turned in the seam allowance? I think I said I turned it in 1/2 inch, but it should have only been a 1/4 inch because that is our hem allowance. Okay, so I'm starting at the underlay, and that will mean that I'm going to go all the way around the skirt, continuing to that front overlay extension. Okay, so if your hem looks ripply at all, now's a good time to hit it with some steam to get rid of any of those ripples or like a lettuce edge kind of effect. And now we're going to focus on the front extension. You don't need to stitch down the front extension with any visible top stitching, but you will want to do a little hand tack right there at the hem where you have turned in your extension at the hem. And that is it. That's your finished skirt. Okay, everyone, that is it, your Claudette skirt. I hope you have loved sewing this alongside me today, and I can't wait to see all the different variations you make of this skirt. So as always, please share your makes with me on social media and use the hashtag #CharmPatterns. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being patrons, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.